Hello and welcome to this Rethinking Anatomy video. In today's video we're going to be looking at the Teres Major muscle. We're going to be looking at the anatomy, but then specifically its relevance for when people have certain issues both in the gym and clinically as well. So attachment site wise, we have the lateral border of the scapula. If you go down into this bottom portion, so the posterior portion just inferiorly here, this bottom third is where the Teres Major is going to attach, or at least be an origin in typical thinking. It's going to run anteriorly and it moves into the intratubercular sulcus and the same insertion point as latissimus dorsi on the anterior portion of the humerus. So as we come round here to the front, it's at this portion here. So with this muscle, we obviously have the much larger latissimus dorsi muscle here, which is running up through on the iliac crest and then elements of thoracolumbar fascia. And if you think of the Teres Major, it's almost like a continuation of the attachment of the lat, but then attaches for the scapula to give us more stability in relation to the humerus and the scapula. But the reason why this muscle is so important when it comes to training in the gym is that when we do rowing motions, so when we're doing very heavy either bent over rows or anything which is requiring the body to drive the elbow backwards and extend the shoulder, this muscle is going to have to shorten and become very tight to stabilize the GH joint as it's going into internal rotation. And what typically happens is that it becomes so short and contracted, it then is going to give us this sustained internally rotated position with slight element of extension. But what this does, which is very common in a lot of gym goers, is that because we have this internal rotation of the humeral head, it then prevents us from being able to properly supinate. This supination chain, so basically our ability to bring the palm upwards, is part of the external rotation process of the arm. So in other words, these heavy rows and upper back movements and things such as deadlifts as well, which put in a tremendous strain on the posterior elements of the shoulder, is then going to shut off our supination, and as a byproduct is going to make exercises where we require a lot more external rotation more challenging. And this can be things such as bicep curls, it can be things such as shoulder presses, and it can be anything where we're trying to abduct our arm above our head like so. But as well as this, what we'll find as well with complaints is that if you have elbow issues and if you also have wrist issues or a restriction in that sense, is that we can follow it up where this muscle becomes very hypertonic and it may be the source of the problem. And when doing soft tissue therapy, I'll often get people to supinate the palm of the hand and pronate it whilst applying some pressure here, and they'll get referral all down the arm, but also notice how restricted this muscle is. So what we're going to be looking at in the gym is two movements. First of all, something which is going to shorten and send a neurological stimulus to the Teres Major. So in other words, work that muscle properly as it extends and internally rotates the arm. And once that muscle has been stimulated in a shortened range, we're then going to do the opposite and drive supination and then ability to externally rotate the humerus in the GH socket. And the reason doing this is that doing this on a regular basis where we go shorten the muscle, then lengthen the muscle, it's going to improve the shoulder mechanics itself, which is going to therefore have an impact on our ability to supinate and externally rotate, and then help the whole shoulder joint for a healthier and happier pressing and rowing motions. So the principle we're going to be using here is something called a muscle energy technique, and this is very typically used in treatment therapy. However, all we're going to do is use weights and cables instead of an application that's usually done by a therapist. So what we have here is something called a post-isometric relaxation, which is that when a muscle is contracted or has to work really hard, it's then going to have a short period of time where it relaxes. It's at this point where it relaxes is that when you then want to get the opposing muscles, so the antagonistic muscles, to then contract, and then you're going to improve that range of motion. So as we've discussed, is that the Teres Major can be an inhibitor of supination and external rotation. So if we work on those factors to strengthen them, as the Teres Major has been shortened and is in a relaxation period, that's going to improve the whole mechanics of the system. So first of all, we're going to work on shortening the Teres Major. So we're going to have shoulder extension, internal rotation, abduction. So basically the position I want to bring myself in is like so. Now with the position of the cable, if the cable is high up, we're going to have the most amount of tension when it's at 90 degrees, or the most amount of external forces when at 90 degrees in this position. So if I want to make it very challenging as I'm bringing it past my body, you roughly want to have the cable level with the hand as it's extending, as your shoulder's in extension. So drop that down just a fraction to here. So I'm going to hold on to the cable like so. I'm going to pull it back and I'm going to internally rotate my hand. And it's very important that you have that ability to rotate inwards. Now, if your client already has very internally rotated shoulders, so they bring forwards like this, just tell them, just make sure the weight is manageable, so it's as light as they can. They bring it backwards into that position. As soon as the shoulder starts to anteriorly rotate, just get them to stop and then just rotate the hand in and internally rotate. If it's too much on a cable, simply get them to use a band and then you can find the most appropriate resistance. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hold an isometric with extension and internal rotation of the shoulder. So internally rotate, hold, 1, 2. I'm going to bring it back and then again hold, 1, 2, and again bring it back, hold, 1, 2. So extension, internal rotation, and really squeezing. And you'll be able to feel muscles in the shoulder. You might feel tricep, you might feel rear delt. What's the main thing is that you do the movement and is able to hold it. So I've got now a period now where the teres major has worked, it's in its relaxation period. Now what we're going to be doing is working on the supination process. So you can get a rope or a handle like this, have it level with the wrist. I'm going to bring this up just a fraction. It's level with the wrist, and what you're then going to do is you're going to hold on and train the supination element to it. So I'm going to hold here, keep my elbow tucked in. I'm going to rotate like this and supinate the forearm. So I'm going to go back like so and supinate here as well. So keeping the elbow tucked in, rotating round, bring it back like this, and again rotating round here. You'll feel the elbow working, you might feel a little bit of medial delt, you might feel a little bit of bicep, but what we're doing is training that whole chain of supination up that level. And you can do anywhere between 5 or 6 reps, just as many as you can, making sure you keep it with good form. So just to reiterate there, we have now fired up that supination pathway whilst this is relaxed. If you strengthen both those processes, what you'll notice is much better wrist flexion, so the ability to supinate the arm all the way through, but also a lot smoother with your pressing and external rotation motions, which makes this an ideal primer and warm-up prior to doing upper body, especially above the head movements such as shoulder pressing.